I'm Mikayla Mitchell, 28 years old, and 3 months ago I became both a widow and a new mother within the same devastating week. My husband David lost his battle with lymphoma just 5 days after our daughter Emma was born, the daughter he fought so hard to stay alive to meet. At his funeral, while I stood there holding our newborn baby, his mother Carol pulled me aside and whispered the words that shattered what was left of my heart. Honestly, Mikayla, that baby will just remind you of the pain of losing David. It might be better if you moved on somewhere else. I thought grief had already broken me, but I was about to discover that some family members see tragedy as an opportunity. What happened next would expose a web of manipulation that had been spinning around David's life insurance and our home for months. Before we jump back in, tell me where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. If you've ever had to fight for your child's future while drowning in grief, make sure you like this video, because this story gets much darker before it gets better. David and I met in college, two kids from Ohio, who fell in love over coffee and study sessions. He was studying computer science while I pursued psychology, and we spent hours talking about our dreams for the future. David wanted to create software that would help people, while I planned to become a family therapist. We got married 2 years after graduation in a small ceremony that felt perfect. Just our families and closest friends celebrating the beginning of what we thought would be a lifetime together. Our wedding photo sits on my nightstand now, showing two people who believed nothing could touch their happiness. David's eyes were bright with joy as he held me close, both of us laughing at something his best man had whispered. We looked invincible, like we could handle anything life threw at us. After the wedding, David got a job at a tech startup in Columbus while I established my private practice. We bought our house, a charming bungalow with enough bedrooms for the children we planned to have. David was making good money, and I was building my client base. Everything was falling into place exactly as we dreamed. We tried for a baby for almost 2 years before I finally saw those 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test. David cried when I showed him, spinning me around our kitchen until we were both dizzy with happiness. He started talking to my belly that same day, convinced our baby should hear about algorithms and love stories from the very beginning. That's when the headaches started. David blamed work stress, then excitement about the pregnancy. But they got worse, followed by fatigue and night sweats that left our sheets soaked. I begged him to see a doctor, but David was stubborn, insisting he was just tired from working extra hours to save money for the baby. The diagnosis came during my second trimester: aggressive lymphoma. The oncologist explained treatment options while I sat there 7 months pregnant, watching my husband's face crumble as he processed words like chemotherapy and survival rates. "We're going to fight this," David whispered, grabbing my hand. "I'm going to meet our baby, Mikayla. I promise you that." He kept that promise, but barely. The chemo was brutal, and David lost 40 pounds along with his beautiful dark hair, but he never complained. Instead, he spent hours researching baby names and setting up the nursery with military precision. He installed a rocking chair by the window where he planned to read bedtime stories every night. Emma arrived 3 weeks early, as if she knew time was running out. David was so weak that nurses had to help him hold her, but when she was placed in his arms, his face transformed. With pure love and wonder. "She has your eyes," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "She's perfect, Mikayla. Look what we made." For 5 precious days we were a family. David held Emma for hours, singing soft lullabies and taking hundreds of photos. He made me promise to tell her about him every day, to show her the videos he'd recorded for her future birthdays. On the 5th day, he died holding my hand while Emma slept in the bassinet beside his bed. His last words were about taking care of our girls and making sure we knew how much he loved us. Thought that was the end of my story, that burying my husband while still recovering from childbirth was the worst thing that could happen. I had no idea the real nightmare was just beginning. The funeral program sits in my memory box now, a reminder of how quickly grief can turn sinister. Carol had insisted on handling all arrangements while I recovered in the hospital, claiming she wanted to help during such a difficult time. At the time, I was grateful I could barely function, let alone plan a memorial service, but I should have seen the warning signs and how she took complete control. Carol chose everything: flowers, music, photos, without asking my input. Not one displayed photo included me, as if our 5-year marriage had never happened. When I questioned this, she dismissed my concerns. "These photos really capture who David was," she said coldly, "before all the ... complications." She called our marriage and Emma complications. The service was beautiful, I'll admit. David's colleagues and friends gave touching eulogies. But when family spoke, Carol only acknowledged David's siblings. She never asked if I wanted to say anything about my own husband. I sat in the front row holding Emma, feeling like a stranger. At my own husband's funeral, people whispered around me, their eyes curious rather than sympathetic. I heard fragments that made my skin crawl. "So young to be a widow. That poor baby ... double quotes. What will she do now?" After the service, during the reception at Carol's house, I retreated to David's old bedroom to nurse Emma privately. The room was exactly as he'd left it in high school: trophies, posters, a Star Wars comforter. It felt wrong, like visiting a museum rather than mourning my husband. That's when Carol found me. Her tone was different now, colder, more calculating. "Mikayla, we need to talk about your situation. It's going to be very difficult raising that baby alone. Financially, I mean." My stomach dropped. "We'll manage. David had life insurance." Oh, honey," Carol interrupted with that patronizing voice. "I don't think you understand how expensive children are. David always worried about being a burden." The way she said "burden" made my blood run cold. David was never a burden. He was my husband, and Emma is his daughter. Carol's expression shifted, revealing something ugly beneath her mask of concern. "Are you, though? Really? You barely knew David for 5 years. Emma will never know him at all. Sometimes I wonder if it wouldn't be kinder for both of you to start fresh somewhere else." I stared at her, hardly believing what I was hearing. "This is my home. Emma deserves to know where she comes from, does she?" Carol stood up, smoothing her black dress. "Honestly, Mikayla, that baby will just remind us of the pain of losing David. Every time we look at her, we'll see what we lost. It might be better if you moved on somewhere else. For everyone's sake." The words hit like a physical blow. "How can you say that? She's your granddaughter, is she?" Carol's smile was sharp. "David was barely conscious those last weeks. Pain. Medication can make people confused, make them sign things they don't understand. I'm sure he would have wanted what's best for his real family." She left me sitting in David's childhood bedroom, trying to process what had just happened. The other family members were equally cold during the rest of the reception, as if they'd all received the same memo. "Mikayla and the baby are no longer family." For the first time since David's death, I felt something other than grief. I felt afraid. David's phone became my lifeline in those first weeks. I kept it charged and close, sometimes just holding it while Emma slept. It contained our text history, photos of our life together, and voice memos he'd recorded for Emma during treatment. I had no idea it would become the key to uncovering Carol's conspiracy. The call started 3 days after the funeral. I was feeding Emma at 2 a.m. when David's phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar local number. "Hello, is this David Mitchell?" The voice was professional, clipped. "No, I'm sorry. David passed away last week. This is his wife, Mikayla." There was a pause, then papers shuffling. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Richard from State Farm Insurance. I'm calling about Mr. Mitchell's life insurance policy. We have questions about the beneficiary information." My heart raced. What kind of questions? According to our records, there was a request to change the primary beneficiary about 6 weeks ago. but we need to verify some information before processing the claim. 6 weeks ago, David had been heavily medicated and barely conscious. I don't understand. I'm the beneficiary on David's life insurance. Ma'am, I'm showing that a Carol Mitchell called to initiate a beneficiary change form. She identified herself as the policyholder's mother and said she had power of attorney. The bottle slipped from my hand. That's impossible. Carol never had power of attorney, and David never wanted to change the beneficiary. I understand your confusion. That's why we're calling to verify. Can you come in this week to straighten this out? The next morning brought another call, this time from a law office I never heard of. Mrs. Mitchell, this is Sarah Chen from Chen & Associates. We're calling about your husband's estate. We have questions about the will that was filed for probate. David's will? I haven't filed anything for probate yet. That's interesting. According to our records, a will was filed last week by Carol Mitchell, who identified herself as the executor. She brought what she claimed was your husband's most recent will, dated about 2 months ago. 2 months ago, David had been in the hospital, barely able to hold a conversation. There has to be some mistake. I'm supposed to inherit everything. Mrs. Mitchell, I think you need to come in immediately. There seems to be confusion about your husband's final wishes. That afternoon, Carol showed up at my door unannounced, with a casserole and that same fake smile from the funeral. Mikayla, dear, I brought dinner. I know how hard it must be, managing everything alone. She pushed past me into the house, setting the casserole on my counter like she owned the place. Emma started crying, and Carol's expression tightened with annoyance. That baby has quite a set of lungs. David was never that fussy as an infant. What are you really doing here, Carol? Can't a grandmother visit? I heard you've been making phone calls today, asking questions about David's affairs. My blood ran cold. How did she know about my meetings? I'm just trying to understand David's final wishes. Oh, honey, there's no confusion. David was very clear about what he wanted. He knew you were young, inexperienced with finances. He wanted his family to take care of his assets properly. I am his family. Emma and I are his family. Carol's mask slipped, revealing something predatory underneath. Are you? You knew him for 5 years. I raised him. I know what David really wanted, what he would have wanted if he hadn't been distracted. I think you should leave. Of course, dear. I just wanted to make sure you understood the situation before you make any unfortunate decisions. After she left, I sat holding Emma and David's phone, feeling like I was drowning. I scrolled through his text messages more carefully and found several from Carol in his final weeks about paperwork and getting things in order. One message made my stomach turn. David, I know this is hard, but you need to think about what's best for everyone. David had responded, Mum, Mikayla is my wife. She and Emma are my family now. Carol's reply was chilling. We'll see about that. The safe in David's office was supposed to contain our most important documents, birth certificates, insurance policies, and most importantly, his will. David had always been meticulous about organization, keeping physical copies in fireproof storage. He'd shown me the combination years ago, making me practice until I could open it in my sleep. Promise me you'll know where to find everything. If something happens, he'd said when we were young, and the request seemed paranoid rather than prophetic. Now, standing in front of the empty safe 3 weeks after his funeral, I understood why he'd been so insistent. The safe door hung open, revealing nothing but bare metal shelves, and the lingering smell of Carol's perfume. She'd been in my house, in David's private office, and she'd taken everything. I frantically searched David's digital files. He'd been obsessive about backing up documents, but when I navigated to the legal documents folder, it was empty, completely deleted, as if it had never existed. I called Carol with shaking fingers. Where are David's papers, Carol? Papers? I'm not sure what you mean. The documents from his safe. His will, insurance policies, our house deed. Everything is missing. There was a pause. Oh, those papers. David asked me to handle his affairs. He was worried about leaving you with complicated legal matters. David never asked you to do that. Honey, David was on a lot of pain medication. He was concerned about making sure everything was handled properly. He signed papers giving me authority to manage his estate. Show me the papers. If David really signed something, I want to see it. Of course, dear. I'll have my lawyer send copies. But Mikayla, there were some personal loans David took out. Loans that need to be repaid. What loans? We shared all our accounts. There were no personal loans. Insurance doesn't cover everything, sweetheart. David took out loans to cover expenses. He didn't want to worry you while you were pregnant. This was news to me. David and I have been completely transparent about money, especially during his illness. I want documentation of these supposed loans, Carol, and I want David's papers returned immediately. There's no need to get upset. I'm trying to help. David's estate is complicated, and you don't have experience with these financial matters. It's better if I handle everything. I'm his wife. I'm perfectly capable of handling my own husband's estate. Carol's tone shifted, becoming colder. Are you? Because from what I can see, you can barely handle that baby, let alone complex legal matters. David was worried about this. He wasn't sure you'd be able to manage everything on your own. David trusted me completely. Men say things to their wives to make them feel better. But when it comes to serious decisions about money, they often have different conversations with their families. I ended the call before I could say something I'd regret. In the back of David's desk drawer, I found a small notebook filled with his handwriting passwords, account numbers, and important contacts. On the last page, dated 2 weeks before his death, was an entry that made my heart race. Mom acting strange about will and insurance. Keeps asking about beneficiaries. Told her everything goes to M&E as planned. She seemed upset. Need to talk to Henderson about securing documents. Worried she might try something. Henderson, David's lawyer. I'd forgotten about him in the chaos of grief and Carol's manipulations. That afternoon, Carol returned with a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as her attorney, William Preston. They sat in my living room like they owned it. Mrs. Mitchell, Preston began, opening his briefcase. We're here to discuss your husband's estate and the best path forward. He slid papers across my coffee table loan documents, showing David had supposedly borrowed $200,000 against our house. Insurance forms changing beneficiaries, even a document transferring ownership of David's car to Carol. These are all fake, I said. David never signed any of these. Mrs. Mitchell, Carol said with false sympathy. David was very concerned about your ability to handle financial responsibilities. He wanted his assets protected and managed properly. By giving them all to you. Preston's expression hardened. Mrs. Mitchell, I would be careful about making accusations of fraud. You're a single mother with no significant income, facing substantial debts. Mrs. Carol Mitchell is offering to take responsibility for these burdens. That's a generous offer. The threat was clear. Accept Carol's theft or face a legal battle. I couldn't afford that after they left. I sat staring at the empty safe. Carol had stolen our documents, but she'd made one crucial mistake she'd underestimated. How far a mother will go to protect her child's future. Henderson and Associates occupied a modest office building downtown. James Henderson had handled our house purchase and were drafting a careful, thorough attorney who dotted every I and crossed every T. Now, sitting across from his desk with Emma in her car seat, I hoped that attention to detail would save us. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm so sorry for your loss, Henderson said. David was a good man. I was shocked to hear about his passing. Mr. Henderson, someone is claiming David changed his will before he died, but I know that's not true. Do you have copies of his actual will? Henderson frowned, opening a thick file. That's very strange. I do have copies of David's will from 2 years ago. According to that document, you are the primary beneficiary of his entire estate, with Emma as contingent beneficiary. David never contacted me about changes. Relief flooded through me. So the will filed with probate court is fake. If someone filed a different will, then yes, It's almost certainly fraudulent. He studied the documents I brought. Mrs. Mitchell, this is definitely not a will I prepared. The language is wrong. The formatting is inconsistent. And this signature has been traced. Look, you can see where the pen hesitated. Carol claims David signed it while on pain medication. Impossible. I spoke with David just 3 weeks before his death. He called specifically to confirm his will was current and that all documents were secure. He was concerned someone might try to manipulate his affairs while he was incapacitated. My heart started racing. What exactly did he say? Henderson consulted his notes. He said his mother had been asking questions about his will and insurance policies. He wanted to make sure I had secure copies and that no changes could be made without. Both your signatures. He was very lucid, very concerned about protecting you and Emma. The pieces were falling into place. Carol had been trying to manipulate David, and when he became suspicious, she'd simply forged his signature instead. What can we do? First, we file an immediate challenge to the fraudulent will. I'll prepare an affidavit stating the filed will is not authentic. Second, we file the real will and petition for you to be appointed as rightful executor. Henderson pulled out another folder. There's something else. After David called me, I researched your mother-in-law's background. Carol Mitchell has been involved in 2 previous estate disputes, one involving her own mother's will, another involving her late husband's brother's estate. In both cases, she was accused of manipulating elderly or incapacitated family members. My blood ran cold. What happened in those cases? The first was settled out of court. The family paid her to avoid a legal battle. The second case, the brother died before it could be resolved, and his children couldn't afford to continue fighting, so she's done this before. It appears so. And Mrs. Mitchell, in both cases she used the same lawyer who visited you, William Preston. Henderson opened his desk drawer and pulled out a folder bound with a rubber band. David asked me to give this to you if anything happened to him. Inside was a letter in David's handwriting. My dearest Mikayla, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're probably dealing with more than grief. I'm worried my mother will try to take advantage of the situation. Don't let her bully you. You are stronger than you know. Fight for Emma's future. Fight for our memory. Henderson has copies of everything important. Trust him. Forever yours, David. I was crying before I finished reading. Even facing death, David had been trying to protect us from his mother's greed. The original will in my hands wasn't just a legal document. It was proof of David's real wishes and evidence of Carol's fraud. The State Farm office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and sandwich shop. Richard Kowalski had been our agent when David increased his life insurance after we bought the house. Now, with Henderson beside me for support, I hoped his thoroughness would expose Carol's fraud. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm glad you came in, Richard said, pulling out a thick file. We've been trying to sort out conflicting claims about your husband's policy. What kind of conflicting claims? About 6 weeks before your husband's death, we received a call from Carol Mitchell claiming to be his mother. She said she had power of attorney and needed to discuss changing the beneficiary. Henderson leaned forward. Did she provide documentation? She said she'd mail it, but we never received anything. When we followed up, she became agitated and accused us of blocking her access to her son's affairs. Richard opened the file and pulled out the original policy. The beneficiary section clearly listed me as primary beneficiary and Emma as contingent. The coverage was $800,000. This is the policy as it stands in our system, Richard continued. Your husband never filed changes. But 2 weeks later, Carol Mitchell contacted our corporate office claiming we were refusing to process legitimate beneficiary changes. What kind of changes? I asked. According to her claims, your husband had signed forms changing the primary beneficiary from you to her, with a trust fund for your daughter. She demanded we process her claim immediately. Henderson examined the documents. Do you have copies of these supposed forms? That's where it gets interesting, Richard said, pulling out more papers. She did submit paperwork, But our fraud department flagged it immediately. Take a look at this signature. The signature was obviously forged, shaky, and unnatural. More importantly, the form was dated 1 week before David's death, when he'd been barely conscious. We refused to process the change, Richard continued. That's when Carol Mitchell hired William Preston, who threatened legal action if we didn't honor what he called David's clear final wishes. What's the current status? Henderson asked. The policy is frozen pending resolution of the beneficiary dispute. We can't pay anyone until we have a court order. But based on our investigation, assuming Mrs. Mitchell can provide proper documentation, the $800,000 should go to her. $800,000. No wonder Carol was willing to commit. Felonies to steal it. Richard handed me a business card. Mrs. Mitchell, our corporate security department has opened a formal investigation into Carol Mitchell's attempted fraud. They're willing to cooperate fully with any criminal charges. Criminal charges? What, she attempted forging signatures, impersonating you, filing false claims? These are serious felonies. The insurance industry takes fraud very seriously. Outside the office, Henderson and I sat in his car while Emma napped. The magnitude of Carol's crimes was becoming clearer. She's not just stealing from you, Henderson said quietly. She's stealing from Emma. That insurance money was David's final gift to his daughter, money for her education, her future. Carol is literally stealing from her own granddaughter. The cruelty was breathtaking. David had worked so hard to provide for Emma's future, and Carol was trying to steal every penny. What happens now? Now we file criminal charges. Insurance fraud is a felony. Identity theft is a felony. Forgery is a felony. Carol Mitchell is looking at decades in prison if convicted. That evening, I held the life insurance policy, the real one, with my name as beneficiary. It was more than financial protection. It was proof of David's love and determination to care for Emma and me even after death. Carol had underestimated the paper trail she was creating with every forged signature and fraudulent phone call. Insurance companies deal with fraud daily and have systems to detect it. The investigation was just beginning. But for the first time since David's death, I felt like we might actually win. The certified letter from the county recorder's office arrived on a Tuesday morning, mixed in with sympathy cards and medical bills. The official seal caught my attention, but nothing prepared me for what I read. Notice of property ownership dispute was stamped across the top in red letters. According to the document, someone had filed paperwork claiming our house had been transferred to Carol Mitchell prior to David's death. My hands shook as I read it 3 times. Someone was claiming David had signed over the deed to our house, the home where Emma was taking her first steps, where David had painted clouds in her nursery. I called Henderson immediately. They're trying to take my house, I said without preamble. Carol filed paperwork claiming David transferred the deed to her. When did you receive this notice? Just now. Henderson, they can't actually take my house, can they? Mrs. Mitchell, I need you to bring me that letter immediately. If someone filed a fraudulent deed transfer, we need to challenge it right away. An hour later, I was back in Henderson's office. He studied the county notice with a deep frown. This is sophisticated fraud, he said finally. Someone filed a quitclaim deed claiming David transferred his interest in the house to his mother as a gift. Dated 2 months ago when David was in the hospital. That's impossible. David was barely conscious 2 months ago. The good news is your name is also on the original deed as joint owner. Even if David had legitimately transferred his interest, which he didn't, you would still own 50%. So they can't just kick me out. Not legally. But this fraudulent deed creates a cloud on your title. You won't be able to sell or refinance until this is resolved. We drove to the county courthouse. The recorder's office was busy with routine property transfers and business filings. The clerk pulled up the deed transfer on her computer. Filed 3 weeks ago by William Preston, attorney for Carol Mitchell. There's a notarized signature and everything. When we got copies, Henderson's expression darkened. The signature was obviously forged, even more poorly done than the fake will. But what made my blood run cold was the notarization. According to the paperwork, David's signature had been witnessed by Robert Chen on a date when David was in intensive care, unconscious. This notary witnessed David signing while he was in a coma, I said. Either the notary is involved or someone forged his seal too. Back at Henderson's office, he called the notary whose seal appeared on the deed. Mr. Chen, this is James Henderson. I'm calling about a document you supposedly notarized 3 weeks ago, a property deed for David Mitchell. You've never heard of David Mitchell? And you were out of the country 3 weeks ago? Henderson hung up with a grim expression. Robert Chen has never heard of David or Carol. He was in Taiwan visiting family when this deed was supposedly notarized. Someone stole his notary seal and forged his signature. How is that possible? Notary seals can be counterfeited. Professional fraudsters know how to make documents look legitimate. The scope of Carol's operation was staggering. This wasn't just grief or confusion, this was organized crime involving lawyers, forged documents, and fake notarizations. What do? We file an emergency motion to void the fraudulent deed. We also file criminal charges for forgery, notary, fraud, and attempted theft. And Mrs. Mitchell, I think it's time to involve the FBI. The FBI? This kind of sophisticated fraud, crossing state lines, involving stolen notary seals, it's federal territory. Carol Mitchell isn't just stealing from you. She's part of a larger criminal enterprise. That night, I walked through the house David and I had planned to fill with Emma's childhood memories. The kitchen where he'd insisted on a breakfast nook for family meals. The living room where he'd assembled Emma's swing. The nursery where he'd painted clouds and stars. Carol wanted to take all of this away from Emma, to sell our memories and liquidate our love for cash in her pocket. The fraudulent deed wasn't just evidence of Carol's crimes. It was proof she'd crossed a line from which there would be no return. She wasn't just stealing money. She was trying to steal Emma's childhood home. Marcus Rodriguez came highly recommended by Henderson's office, a former police detective who specialized in financial crimes. He was younger than I'd expected, with sharp eyes and a direct manner. We met at a coffee shop near his office, Emma sleeping in her stroller, while Marcus spread documents across our table. Mrs. Mitchell, what your mother-in-law has done is textbook elder abuse fraud, adapted for grieving families, he began. I've spent 2 weeks digging into Carol Mitchell's background, and what I found is deeply disturbing. He pulled out a thick folder. First, Carol's financial situation. She's not the wealthy, stable matriarch she pretends to be. She's been living off credit cards for 3 years, since she lost money in a bad investment scheme. David never mentioned financial problems. She's good at hiding it. I found records of maxed-out credit cards, 2 loans against her house, and collection agencies pursuing her. As of last month, Carol Mitchell owed approximately $180,000 to various creditors. The number hit me like a blow. Carol wasn't just greedy, she was desperate. That explains the urgency, Marcus continued. She needs money immediately. That's why she moved so quickly with forged documents. He pulled out bank statements. Here's where it gets interesting. I found evidence Carol has been planning this for months, possibly since David's diagnosis. Marcus slid a statement across the table. This is David's checking account. Look at these withdrawals from his last 3 months. I studied the statement, recognizing the pattern. Small withdrawals, $200 here, $500 there, all made at ATMs near the hospital. She was stealing from his account while he was dying. It gets worse. I tracked down ATM footage from 2 withdrawals. Carol used David's debit card and knew his PIN. When questioned, she claimed David had given her the card to handle expenses. Systematic theft was breathtaking. While I focused on David's care and Emma's birth, Carol had been quietly draining our accounts. How much did she steal? Approximately $15,000 over 3 months. She kept withdrawals small to avoid fraud alerts, but the cumulative amount is substantial. Marcus pulled out another document. This is a power of attorney form Carol tried to get David to sign 6 weeks before his death. The hospital's social worker remembers because David became agitated and refused. He never told me about that. According to the social worker, Carol claimed she needed authority to handle David's affairs. When he refused, she became angry and accused the staff of turning him against his family. Marcus opened another folder. Mikayla Mitchell has a 20-year history of targeting vulnerable family members for financial exploitation. He spread out a timeline. 1998, she convinced her elderly aunt to change her will. 2003, she gained power of attorney over her father-in-law and sold his house while he was in a nursing home. 2015, she manipulated her brother-in-law into signing over his life insurance while he was dying. She's been doing this for decades. Each case follows the same pattern. Identify a vulnerable family member, gain their trust during a health crisis, manipulate them into signing over assets, then disappear when the family tries to fight back. Marcus showed me photographs from his surveillance. I've been watching Carol for the past week. She's been meeting regularly with William Preston and 2 other men I haven't identified. They're clearly planning something big. The photos showed strategy sessions, documents spread across tables, intense conversations, the body language of people planning something elaborate and illegal. I think they're planning to liquidate David's assets quickly before your legal challenges can stop them. Marcus continued. The fake will, forged deed, insurance fraud, it's all designed to give them immediate access to your husband's money. How much money are we talking about? Marcus consulted his notes. Conservatively? The life insurance is $800,000. Your house is worth $400,000. David's retirement and savings probably total another $200,000. We're looking at over $1 million in assets. No wonder Carol was willing to commit multiple felonies. What do we do with this information? We turn it over to the FBI and district attorney. Mikayla Mitchell isn't just a thief. She's the head of an organized criminal enterprise that's been stealing from vulnerable families for decades. The financial records Marcus had gathered weren't just evidence of Carol's crimes. They were a roadmap to justice and the key to recovering everything she'd tried to steal from Emma's inheritance. Digital recorder was smaller than I'd expected, no bigger than a USB drive, designed to capture clear audio while remaining hidden. Marcus had recommended the model used by law enforcement for undercover operations. As I practiced flipping it inside my jacket, my hands trembled with fear and determination. Are you sure about this, Mrs. Mitchell? Henderson asked for the 3rd time. We have enough evidence to file criminal charges without risking a confrontation. I need to hear her admit it, I said, adjusting the device. I need to know why she thought she could steal from her own granddaughter. We were in Henderson's conference room, preparing for what felt like the most important conversation of my life. Emma was with my mother. I couldn't risk having her present when I confronted Carol. Marcus spread documents across the table. Remember, the goal isn't a full confession. We just need her to admit key facts: that she forged David's signature, tried to change insurance beneficiaries, took documents from your house without permission. What if she doesn't say anything incriminating? She will, Marcus said confidently. People like Carol can't resist bragging about how clever they've been. She thinks she's outsmarted everyone. Henderson handed me a list of questions designed to get Carol talking about details. The more specific information she provided, the stronger our case would become. The plan was simple but carefully orchestrated. I would invite Carol over to discuss Emma's future and David's estate. Henderson would park outside, ready to intervene if things became dangerous. Marcus would monitor from across the street. If she becomes aggressive or threatening, end the conversation immediately, Henderson emphasized. We don't need a full confession. Even partial admissions will be devastating in court. I drove home through familiar neighborhoods that suddenly felt dangerous. At home, I walked through each room, seeing it with new eyes. This wasn't just my house, it was a crime scene where Carol had stolen documents and violated our privacy. I called Carol from the kitchen phone. keeping my voice neutral. Carol, it's Mikayla. I've been thinking about what you said at the funeral. About Emma's future and the complications with David's estate. Could you come over this afternoon? I think we need an honest conversation. Of course, dear. Carol's voice was immediately warm and condescending. I'm so glad you're finally ready to be realistic. I'll be there in an hour. The hour passed slowly. I set up the recording device, tested it twice, then positioned myself in the living room where acoustics would be best. I arranged David's notebook on the coffee table where Carol would see it. When the doorbell rang, my heart raced. This was the moment when I would finally confront the woman who had been systematically stealing from her dying son and infant granddaughter. Carol arrived carrying flowers and wearing her fake funeral smile. Mikayla, sweetheart, you look tired. This whole situation has been so stressful for everyone. Come in, Carol. We need to talk. She settled into David's favorite armchair and looked around with calculating eyes. I noticed her gaze linger on family photos and artwork, anything with monetary value. I'm so glad you called, she began. I've been worried about you, trying to handle complicated legal matters by yourself. David always said you were more creative than business-minded. The casual cruelty of using David's words against me was exactly what Marcus had predicted. Actually, that's what I wanted to discuss, I said, activating the recorder. I've been going through David's papers, and there are things I don't understand. Oh, honey, that's exactly what I was afraid of. Estate planning is so complicated, especially when there are debts you might not know about. What debts, Carol? David and I shared all our accounts. Well, dear, there were personal loans David took during his illness. Medical expenses insurance didn't cover. He didn't want to worry you while you were pregnant. I'd like to see documentation of these loans, of course. My lawyer has the paperwork. David was concerned about protecting you from financial stress during such a difficult time. I pulled out David's notebook. Carol, I found this in David's desk. These are notes he made during his illness. Would you like to see what he wrote about you? For the first time, Carol looked uncomfortable, her eyes fixed on the notebook, mind racing to calculate what David might have documented. The small recorder was capturing everything: Carol's lies about loans, her claims about David's supposed wishes, and most importantly, her growing agitation. As I pressed for details about the missing documents and forged signatures, tomorrow, we would turn this evidence over to the district attorney. Carol's decades-long career of stealing from vulnerable families was finally going to end. I placed the digital recorder on the coffee table, making no effort to hide it. I want everything on the record. Carol's expression shifted. Is that necessary? We're family, are we? I pulled out the forged documents, because I've discovered some interesting things. Those aren't forged, Carol said sharply. David signed those papers himself. Really? While he was in a coma? I showed her the medical records proving David's condition during the supposed signings. Carol's composure cracked. David had moments of clarity the doctors didn't document. I read from David's notebook about being worried she might try something. I didn't forge anything, she exploded. David was confused, making decisions that would ruin Emma's future. Someone had to think clearly. By stealing her inheritance, by managing it properly. You're 28 with no experience. You'd blow through David's insurance and leave Emma with nothing. The mask was off. David built that wealth with values. I taught him. I deserve a say in how it's distributed. So you admit you forged his signature? I signed papers David would have signed if he'd been thinking clearly. I protected his daughter from someone who never belonged in this family. Carol was confessing to everything while justifying it as protection. The recorder captured every self-incriminating word. David called me the night before he died, she added cruelly. He was having second thoughts about leaving everything to someone so inexperienced. Another lie: David had been unconscious for days, but it revealed her true character. The confession recording would be devastating in court. Carol had essentially convicted herself, while explaining her twisted justifications for stealing from her own granddaughter. As Henderson had predicted, Carol couldn't resist bragging about how cleverly she'd manipulated the situation, not realizing she was creating the evidence that would send her to prison. The arrest warrant listed 6 felony charges: forgery, identity theft, attempted grand theft, insurance fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy. Carol was facing 25 years in prison. "We're fast-tracking this case," Walsh explained. "The evidence is overwhelming, and we've been contacted by 7 other families from Carol's previous fraud cases." Carol's arraignment was a media circus. She pleaded not guilty while wearing an orange jumpsuit, looking years older than at the funeral. Her lawyer claimed Carol was a grieving mother who'd misunderstood David's wishes, but the prosecution's case was devastating. Walsh presented the forged documents, medical records proving David's incapacitation, and Marcus's evidence of Carol's criminal patterns spanning decades. The centerpiece was our recording of Carol confessing to fraud. When the recording played in court, I signed papers David would have signed if he'd been thinking clearly. The jury's expressions shifted to disgust. Previous victims testified about Carol's methods, targeting vulnerable families during health crises, gaining trust, then systematically stealing assets. Carol's biggest mistake was testifying in her own defense. Under cross-examination, her entitled personality emerged completely. "When you forged your son's signature, were you acting in his interests or your own?" Walsh asked. "I was protecting his daughter's inheritance from being squandered," Carol replied, falling into the trap. She couldn't resist defending her actions and explaining why she deserved David's money more than his. Wife and daughter. The jury deliberated 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. At sentencing, Judge Hoffman was harsh. "You systematically exploited your son's death to steal from his widow and infant daughter. This represents a profound betrayal of family trust." Carol received 8 years in prison, with full restitution required. The arrest warrant represented justice for David, protection for Emma, and vindication for every family Carol had victimized over her decades-long criminal career. The threatening letter arrived 2 weeks after Carol's sentencing, written in Jennifer's neat handwriting but filled with anger. "Mikayla, I hope you're satisfied. Mum is in prison because you couldn't let go of your need for revenge. David would be ashamed." Jennifer painted Carol as a confused, grieving mother who didn't deserve prison. She blamed me for not handling things quietly within the family. Mark called that afternoon. "You need to drop these charges and get Mom out. This has gone too far." "Your mother committed serious felonies," I replied. "She made mistakes, but 8 years? She's almost 70. We'll pay back whatever money you think she took." Mark couldn't understand why I wouldn't accept restitution instead of prosecution. To him, this was a family matter, not a crime. Jennifer called next, crying and begging for mercy. When I explained the DA was prosecuting regardless, she accused me of manipulating the system. The extended family's reaction was worse. David's relatives sent hostile messages, some calling me a gold digger, others suggesting I should be grateful. Carol had tried to properly manage assets. Uncle Robert hurt most. Family is family. We don't put family members in prison over money disputes. This isn't a dispute. It's systematic fraud spanning decades. But they couldn't accept Carol was a career criminal rather than a confused mother. The isolation was profound. Invitations stopped. Calls went unanswered. They painted Carol as a devoted grandmother whose only crime was carrying too much at the grocery store. David's cousin Sarah confronted me publicly. "Carol's health is failing in prison because you couldn't handle an estate dispute like an adult." That night, I realized David's family would never accept the truth. They would always see me as the outsider who destroyed their family dynamics. The threatening letter revealed their inability to acknowledge that the woman who'd raised them was a calculating predator. Emma didn't need a grandmother who stole from her inheritance, or a family that excused theft as love. The asset recovery statement arrived 6 months after Carol's conviction. As I spread the papers across David's desk, I finally saw what Carol had tried to steal: life insurance. $800,000 plus $47,000 in penalties. State Farm added for Carol's fraudulent delays, plus $25,000 in damages. Our house, $420,000 with clear title after voiding Carol's fraudulent loan documents. Marcus's forensic accounting recovered $23,000 in direct withdrawals from David's accounts, plus $12,000 in forged checks. David's retirement accounts, $180,000. Stock options, $95,000. Even his car, now titled in Emma's name. Total recovery, $1.2 million that Carol had attempted to steal from her granddaughter. The FBI investigation uncovered more. Carol had opened accounts in Emma's name using her social security number, planning to control them as her guardian. Another $150,000 across 3 accounts, Henderson explained. She was stealing money in Emma's name while appearing to protect her inheritance. Each scheme followed the same pattern: exploit David's death and my grief to steal assets quickly. The ironed recovery wasn't just about money, it restored David's legacy. Every dollar returned was victory against Carol's attempt to rewrite our marriage and his wishes. I hired a financial advisor to set up trust structures protecting Emma's inheritance, while allowing access for her needs. Most went into conservative investments growing until adulthood. Also established a legal defense fund for other families victimized by inheritance fraud. Carol's case revealed how common this crime was. The asset recovery statement proved justice could prevail against sophisticated fraud. Carol had spent months planning theft, but left a paper trail leading to conviction and complete recovery, filing the documents in David's safe, the same one Carol had emptied. I thought about the irony. She'd stolen our papers thinking she was stealing our future. Instead, she'd created evidence that imprisoned her and recovered far more than we'd known existed. The $1.2 million represented David's love made tangible and proof that fighting predators was worth every difficult moment. The courthouse was packed for Carol's sentencing. Media vans lined the street as her case had become a symbol of predators targeting grieving families. Carol sat in a grey suit, looking smaller and older. Her lawyer had the defeated air of someone facing serious prison time. Judge Hoffman called. Court to order. We're here for sentencing of Carol Mitchell, convicted of fraud, forgery, identity theft, and elder abuse. I spoke first, holding Emma. Your Honor, Carol tried to steal David's legacy and final wishes. I read her recorded confession. I signed papers David would have signed if he'd been thinking clearly. These aren't the words of a confused mother, but someone who believed she could override a dying man's wishes and steal from his infant daughter. Other victims testified about Carol's decades-long pattern, targeting vulnerable families, gaining trust during crises, then systematically stealing assets. When Carol spoke, she couldn't resist victim blaming. Everything was motivated by love. For my son. I tried to help manage David's affairs, but Mikayla misinterpreted my actions. Judge Hoffman interrupted. How do you explain forged signatures? David was medicated and confused. He asked me to sign papers when too weak. Even facing sentencing, Carol couldn't admit deliberate fraud. Judge Hoffman was scathing. You systematically defrauded your dying son and stole from his widow and infant daughter. You've shown no remorse, no acceptance of responsibility. You exploited your son's final illness to steal from his daughter. You forged his signature while he was unconscious. You were sentenced to 20 years in prison with no parole for 8 years. You will pay full restitution totaling $1.4 million. As they led Carol away in handcuffs, she turned back with hatred mixed with recognition that her criminal career was over. The court transcript served as permanent record of justice served, protecting Emma's inheritance and ensuring this predator could never again exploit grieving families. Justice had finally been served for David's memory and Emma's future. Emma's first photo album sits on my coffee table, documenting the year we survived Carol's betrayal. The early photos show a hollow-eyed woman clutching her baby like a lifeline. But as months passed and we fought back, something changed in my face. Grief joined by strength and determination. Emma's first birthday party was small but meaningful. My parents came from Michigan. Marcus brought his family, and Henderson delivered. Final paperwork confirming Emma's inheritance was secure. Dr. Kim, my grief counselor, was there too, the woman who taught me to channel anger into action. "You can't control what happened," she'd said during our darkest sessions, "but you can control how you respond." The grief support group once started met weekly at the community center. Widowed mothers at different stages of healing, learning that grief becomes something you carry rather than something that carries you. Emma was walking now, babbling constantly, showing glimpses of David in her expressions, the way she tilted her head when concentrating, her stubborn jaw when refusing something. Those moments were bittersweet, but no longer crushing. We'd established new traditions honoring David while building our life. Saturday pancakes shaped like animals. Sunday visits to the memorial garden we'd planted. Bedtime stories from David's recordings, his voice filling her nursery with transcendent love. The house felt different after reclaiming it from Carol's violation. Bright yellow kitchen walls, Emma's favorite color. Rearranged living room accommodating her toys. David's office remained largely unchanged but was no longer a shrine. Now a working space for managing Emma's trust and my growing advocacy work. Learning to trust again was hardest. Carol's betrayal had shattered my faith in family, but through therapy and support groups, I distinguished between healthy caution and paralyzing fear. I'd started dating tentatively. Coffee dates with men who understood I came with a toddler and complicated past. David would have wanted me to find love again, but more importantly, I wanted Emma to see that life could include joy after devastating loss. Emma would grow up knowing her father fought for her future and her mother protected what he'd left. She'd learn that family means people who choose to support each other. That standing up for what's right sometimes means difficult decisions. Most importantly, she'd understand that strength grows from worse circumstances. Love is more powerful than greed, and justice is worth fighting for even when the battle feels impossible. The photo album chronicles our journey, from victims to survivors to thrivers. We'd created something beautiful from something meant to destroy us. Proof that David's love continues shaping our lives in ways Carol could never steal. The David Mitchell Foundation for Family Protection grew from our pain into something powerful. What started as my personal quest for justice evolved into a resource for families facing financial exploitation during vulnerable moments. Predators like Carol rely on victims being too overwhelmed to fight back, I explained to our board of directors. They target people during health crises, after deaths, during divorces, anytime families are emotionally devastated and logically unprepared. The conference room filled with people who understood intimately. Marcus served as chief investigator, using forensic accounting skills to help families uncover fraud. Henderson provided legal guidance, connecting families with appropriate attorneys. Dr. Kim offered counseling for trauma survivors, but the most powerful voices were other survivors, people who'd endured their own versions of what Emma and I experienced. Mrs. Chun helped families navigate insurance fraud. Mr. Patterson specialized in elderly exploitation cases. We've handled 127 cases in 18 months, involving over $8 million in attempted theft, I continued, showing our statistics. The numbers were staggering, representing only families who'd found us. For every case we handled, dozens more probably went undetected. Our approach was comprehensive. Free forensic accounting to uncover theft, legal referrals to experienced attorneys, counseling for emotional trauma, and financial planning to protect recovered assets. We also worked on prevention, conducting seminars about estate planning, red flags, and lobbying for stronger legal protections. The most rewarding part was seeing families reclaim their futures. Last month, we'd helped the Rodriguez family recover $300,000 stolen while their patriarch died of Alzheimer's. We'd prevented the Thompson family from losing their farm to fraudulent property transfers. Each case reminded me of our experience, but showed how much good could come from surviving and fighting back. Our next initiative is the Speakers Bureau, I announced. Families who've successfully fought fraud will share stories at legal conferences and community education events. The idea grew from my own speaking experience. Lawyers, financial advisors, and healthcare workers needed to understand how family fraud actually worked, so they could recognize warning signs and protect clients. Emma, now 2.5, had become our unofficial mascot. She toddled around during board meetings, somehow understanding this was important work. Staff adored her, and she'd learned to wave and say help families. When asked what Mommy did, the foundation operated from a renovated house downtown, funded by Emma's inheritance and donations from grateful families. David would have loved knowing his careful planning was securing Emma's future while helping others protect themselves. We'd established partnerships with law enforcement, training officers to recognize family financial exploitation and providing victim resources. Detective Walsh, who'd prosecuted Carol, served on our advisory board. The David Mitchell Foundation isn't just about recovering stolen money, I explained during recent presentations. It's about restoring families' faith that justice is possible, that love is stronger than greed. After one presentation, a young attorney approached with tears. I have a client whose mother-in-law is doing exactly what happened to you. Can you help? Conversations like that reminded me why this work was crucial. Families needed to know that betrayal by relatives wasn't just personal problems to endure, it was criminal behavior that could and should be prosecuted. The support group charter establishing our foundation wasn't just legal documentation, it was a promise to David that his death wouldn't be in vain, that Emma's trauma would become protection for other children, and that love really could triumph over human greed and manipulation. The letter I'm writing to Emma on her 2nd birthday will be sealed until she turns 18, but I need to write it today while memories are sharp and lessons fresh. She's napping in the nursery where David painted clouds, and I want her to understand someday what happened during her first years. My dearest Emma, today you turn 2, which means it's been exactly 2 years since Daddy died, and your grandmother tried to steal your future. As I write this, you're sleeping peacefully in the room, Daddy prepared with so much love, unaware of the battle we fought to protect what he left you. Your grandmother, Carol, was sentenced to 20 years in prison for trying to steal your inheritance. She forged Daddy's signature, lied to insurance companies, and attempted to take our house all while pretending to be a grieving mother who wanted to help. Some people think I was too harsh prosecuting her, that family problems should be handled privately. But Emma, what she did wasn't a family problem. It was criminal behavior that would have stolen your future and dishonored Daddy's memory. Daddy knew this might happen. He wrote that he was worried about his mother's behavior. He called his lawyer to protect documents. Even while fighting cancer, he was trying to shield us. The money we recovered isn't just money, sweetheart. It's proof of Daddy's love, evidence of his determination to provide for your future even after death. Carol tried to steal that love and turn it into cash for herself. I couldn't let that happen. You'll grow up financially secure because Daddy planned carefully, and I fought to protect his plans. But more importantly, you'll know that love means protection. Family means sacrifice. And standing up for what's right sometimes requires difficult choices. The foundation we started in Daddy's name has helped over 200 families protect themselves from people like Carol. That work grew from our pain, but became something beautiful, proof that tragedy can be transformed into purpose. You'll face challenges, Emma. People will disappoint and betray you. When that happens, remember you come from people who fought back. Daddy fought cancer to meet you. I fought Carol's fraud to protect what he left. You have strength in your DNA. Some of Daddy's family will never forgive me for sending Carol to prison. They'll tell you I was vindictive, that I destroyed the family over money. Don't believe them. I protected our family, you, me. And Daddy's memory from someone who would have destroyed everything he worked to build. By the time you read this, you'll be heading to college on funds Daddy set aside. You'll be driving a car purchased with money he earned through hard work. You'll be living in a world where the David Mitchell Foundation protects other families from predators like Carol. I hope you'll continue that work someday. But more than anything, I hope you'll be the kind of person Daddy and I try to raise, someone who protects the vulnerable, fights for justice, and understands that love means action, not just words. Emma, you are the living embodiment of our love story. You carry Daddy's eyes and determination. You have his intelligence and capacity for joy, but you also have strength that comes from surviving betrayal and choosing love over bitterness. Happy second birthday, my precious girl. May you always know how much you are loved, how much you are worth fighting for, and how much good can come from the worst circumstances when you refuse to give up. All my love, always. Mommy, as I seal the letter in the envelope for our safe, the same safe Carol once emptied, I think about how far we've come. Emma is stirring, making soft sounds that mean she'll wake happy and ready to play. Tonight, I'll read her one of Daddy's recorded stories, his voice filling our home with transcendent love. Tomorrow, we'll continue building the life Carol tried to steal but couldn't destroy. The letter to Emma isn't just a birthday gift, it's proof her story will always be one of triumph over tragedy, love over greed, courage over fear. Emma Mitchell is 2 years old today, beloved daughter of a man who fought to meet her and a woman who fought to protect her. And that, in the end, is the greatest victory of all.